It was exciting to see all of you on the line last week. As we're all very well aware, this year has just been devastating for our workforce. To me, this community coming together to bring language and expertise to a research agenda to actually support the working learner makes me feel hopeful for what is to come. I lead the research initiatives at a nonprofit organization called Opportunity at Work. We're a nonprofit dedicated to improving the economic mobility for the more than 70 million workers in the United States who do not have a four-year college degree, but who are skilled through alternative routes. We call these workers STARS for short. Most commonly, these workers are actually learning the same way many of us are, on the job, by practicing their skills over and over again. Working learners are STARS, and STARS have borne the brunt of this year very heavily. They have been the majority of our laid off workforce, as well as our essential workforce. And to support their economic mobility, we truly believe our field must meet this moment very differently than we have in the past generation. We at Opportunity at Work are accomplishing our mission by leveraging the best work coming out of many of your disciplines. Our goals have been to surface insight from this work for employers, to shift their assumptions, the way they design incentives, and ultimately their behavior and practice towards STARS. I believe this convening matters because one of the observations we've had as a team of researchers tackling what is a very big problem in our country is that there are actually some pretty major gaps in what we need to know as practitioners to address the barriers that STARS face, as well as the opportunities for this population. Much of the insight we need actually sits at the intersection of many of our disciplines, right? There's work on inequality and monopsony and labor economics. There's, the pathways research agenda and sociology, the organizational culture and belonging work from psychology and business. And that's just to get started, right? In part because the field of workforce sits at the intersection of so many disciplines, there have been some pretty major selection effects in what questions get taken on by us as researchers, which have led to holes in our understanding that impact our ability as practitioners to actually drive to results. We think there are opportunities to build bridges, right, between researchers and practitioners, and that in doing so, the way we think about measurement and operationalization of concepts can improve based on learnings from the field. We can actually enhance our research design and ultimately impact the economic stability and mobility opportunities for STARS. It's a true pleasure to invite you to the conversation today with the CEO of my organization, Byron O'Geist, and our dear colleague, the CEO of JFF, Maria Flynn. I'm going to hand it to Jim Tracy of JFF and also a member of the organizing committee. He's going to talk a little bit about the importance of research in one area of work that's really just seen tremendous developments in the past few decades, the progress of assessments to support the working learner. Jim?
Thank you, Papia, and it's great to be participating with everybody in this. Interestingly, just before we went live, we were all chatting together, and Byron raised the issue of assessments as a key area that is that needs considerable improvement in the field. And so I'm going to share on the chat a couple of links, one from JFF and one from MIT. Anybody who's even casually familiar with JFF in recent years can't miss the fact of Maria Flynn's transformational leadership there. And emblematic of that visionary leadership, one dimension of that has been her creation of JFF Labs, which is essentially a think tank within JFF to drive policy thinking and planning. Last year, JFF Labs published the Assessment Technology Survey, which is it really takes the pulse of what the field and state of the art is for assessments. Assessments obviously are going to be so key for working learners because so many of them will be seeking non-traditional pathways into new careers. And I'm also sharing the skills matrix, which was developed principally by George Westerman at JWEL. JWEL is the World Education Lab at MIT, overseen by Sanjay Sarma, who's also participating in these events. So those I think are two of the most important current links to the state of the art. The J-Well matrix, I would say, is the best taxonomy we have to date, but all of this is still a work in progress. And with that, I'll give it over to Meg. I'm looking forward to the conversation between Maria and Byron.
Thank you. I'm Meg Benke. I'm professor at the State University of New York, Empire State College, an adult serving institution for thousands of adult learners. I have the pleasure today of moderating our panel and introducing Maria Flynn, who is president and CEO of Jobs for the Future, a national nonprofit that drives transformation in the American workforce and educational systems. She is a national authority on the future of work, career pathways for underserved individuals, and employer engagement and research. Prior to this work, she had many years also as a senior executive in the US Department of Labor. I also have the pleasure to introduce Byron Ogest. He is the CEO and co-founder of Opportunity at Work, a nonprofit social enterprise whose mission it is to improve economic mobility for the 70+ million workers who are skilled through alternative routes, as Papia introduced, known as STARS. Outside of working on a daily basis with Fortune 500 companies to shape workforce strategies and solutions, Byron is also one of the most influential voices shaping the way we think about the labor market today. He lends his economic insight to policy as well, having served as deputy director of the National Economic Council in the Obama administration, serving on the Biden Policy Institute Policy Advisory Board, and in 2020, co-chaired the Biden-Harris Economic Policy Committee. Welcome to you both.
Good to be here.
And it's great. These two have presented before, and I got to view one of those presentations. We're looking forward to a lively dialogue. In our pre-conversations, we asked Byron and Maria to be tough on us, to challenge us, and to not be afraid to step around opinions or feelings, particularly from us as educators. First, I'd just like to start with a question for Maria. Could you paint for us a picture of the ecosystem? Who are the players and what are their roles in supporting the equitable advancement of working learners? What is the role of the employer? You've done a lot of work in that area.
Sure. So I think the ecosystem is complex, and I think it is becoming even more complex. And so I think just a somewhat simplistic way of looking at it, right, is on the kind of the supply side, you have lots of providers, and that could be adult basic ed providers, community colleges, community-based organizations, four-year universities, boot camps, kind of an explosion of different kind of new and non-traditional providers like Merit America and others that are coming on the scene, right? And so you have all that happening. I would say on the other side, you have the employer dimension. And I think, if there's one thing I'd really want to stress to this group is, don't forget about the employers and don't underestimate their role and their impact and their influence on this population. I think it often gets overlooked or maybe to some degree disregarded. And I think, we have seen progress, I would say, on the employer side in recent years. I would say a much different picture than when I left DOL in 2007, right? I think we are seeing a lot of employers invest more broadly among their employees, right? So 20 years ago, I know Lori Bassi did some research, and some ridiculous number, like 95% of all employer-sponsored training was to executive level staff. That number, thankfully, is shifting and getting more equitably distributed, but there's still work to do. But I think it's important that we look at that and look at the employer both as a funder of training and a provider of training, and the fact that we are seeing a lot of employers not just training folks to advance within their company, but more and more training individuals, for jobs outside of their company as well, right? I think Amazon Career Choice would be one kind of extreme example of that, but a lot of others along that spectrum. Then you have platforms, Guild Education, InStride, Workforce Edge, right, that are really geared towards that employer and corporate market. And then I would say, like, in the middle, you have organizations like mine and Byron's philanthropy, others that are trying to kind of make some sense of this ecosystem as it changes and evolves.
Thank you. Thank you, Marie. You started us off well. And Byron, I know you have some related areas of interest. How are those skilled through these alternative routes tied to this whole working learner conversation? And as Maria was talking, why do we need to rethink skills and how employer behavior can support this area?
Well, thank you. And it's great to see this group assembled. There's a lot of friends here, including Maria, a lot of people who I haven't spent time with, but whose work has influenced ours quite a lot. And I thank you for that. And a special shout out to everyone who has either puppies or kittens on your Zoom default screen, because we all need a little more of that. So to answer your question directly, Meg, I think the 71 million stars, meaning, so they're skilled through alternative routes. What does that mean? As a working definition, we say they've got high school or degree or equivalent. They don't have a 4-year bachelor's degree or degrees beyond that. But they're working in jobs that require like meaningful skills development to like effectively do those jobs. And I think that's a better definition of working learners than just those learners who happen at this moment to be both working and enrolled in a higher education institution. Because if you did it the narrower definition, it begs the question of why are they in that institution? Why are others not? Like what constraints are keeping others away, or indeed what constraints in the workforce are pushing others towards that. So you can't really understand the picture. You kind of like, you're not asking the question, you're assuming an answer if you just sort of focus on those who happen to be in higher education at this moment. So I think my first order answer would be that STARS, working adults who are skilled through alternative routes, is a good definition of working learners. And I would say, like, you ought to look at that as potential convergence of the definition. It also provides the benefit of allowing many vectors across different disciplines to work together across the system, because Maria did a very good job describing how the system is becoming more complex and these additional kind of institutions. But remember, those are institutions that need to be subject to institutional analysis, the incentives they create, the barriers they create. And we can't mix up like learning and skills and talent and what people bring with the institutions that they interact with. Because if you draw the lens back prior to MOOCs, prior to all this stuff, there was learning, right? Like if you had to answer the question, why do we no longer as a species live in caves at the edge of the savannah, hunted by stronger predators, and you only had one word to describe it, the word would be learning, all right? We learned things and we didn't forget, and we spread that. And by the way, we did all of that before there were universities, before there were MOOCs, before there were platforms, before there were any of these things. And so human beings, Homo sapiens, species that learns things, learns collectively, learns individually, and like improves. So that is like really fundamental to start with. So when I say, look, who are working learners, they're the people who built civilization. They're the people who built ultimately, right? That's where all of these institutions ultimately came from. But now we've entered a world, like, and it's been very recent, where employers have, honestly, for purposes of convenience, as job search has, right? Like now you get 1,000 applications for a job. You used to get 30. They have to find a way to screen. It's like keyword search is simple. What's a good keyword search? College degrees. Which college degree? Fine. So now we enter a world where almost 3/4 of the new jobs being created are in job categories where most employers, quote unquote, require a bachelor's degree. By the way, that's true even though only about 40% of Americans have a bachelor's degree. And you get to these ridiculous situations where you have literally only a third of admin assistants have a bachelor's degree, but 3/4 of new job postings for admin assistants, quote unquote, require a bachelor's degree, right? Okay, so this is where we're starting. And I want to be very clear, this wasn't a research-driven outcome. This was a convenience in a changing system that ended up weaponizing higher education. And now it puts higher education in a position where it's, on the one hand, it's got this amazing capacity to support lifelong learning for working learners. And I've done the math. Without who you consider classic education institutions, you absolutely cannot get there, right? I don't think you can get there only with existing higher education institutions. But if higher education institutions are out of the game for lifelong learning, the math doesn't work. There's no possible way we can produce a system that allows that. So it's really, really important that they are. On the other hand, employers were at a moment that's really important because employers have discovered the hard way that if you have processes that, as a tactical convenience to you in the moment, gradually exclude a larger and larger percentage of the potential talent pool from being able to get the experience needed to kind of do these new jobs in the future, then you're going to run into, what are the headlines, right? It's a labor shortage, it's a skills gap, it's all that. It's not working. And so I think there's really, really an opportunity right now for research to inform it. Interdisciplinary research, research that reflects systems thinking, research that doesn't take the definitions that we've got right now for granted, because all the analysis of a skills gap is based on data that actually does not reflect skills at all, right? It's a degree attainment gap. And then they say, we need more people with degrees. Well, that's true to fill a degree attainment gap, okay? So, but anyway, so I think we're at a moment where this community of researchers could make an enormous difference. And the key is to ask the right questions and to not take a bunch of lazy assumptions that are really very widespread right now for granted.
Thank you so much. And lots of agreement in the comments. I also wanted to just mention to the group, if we will have time for a couple of questions for Maria and Byron. So if you do have a pivotal question, please go in and put that in the chat. I wanted to go to that question about questions, Byron, for you and Maria. You know, both of you have headed national, organizations like your own. You've headed federal agencies that, look at these important questions. What would you charge us, as a group of, right here, you've got 180 people who are, willing and eager to work on these questions. What's driving you crazy? What could we help with? And we don't want to do it alone. We're groups of organizations, colleges, researchers, applied people out in the field, employers. So Maria, what are some of the questions that you're worried about right now that we might be able to help on with?
Sure, I have such a long list. Won't be able to get them all in, but I'll hit on a few of my most burning ones. And so I know there are so many great folks on the line here who have done, decades of work around the issue of credentials. And so hello, friends. But I think, encourage us to really think through, like, what is that next set of questions that we need to answer? Because I feel, a lot of kind of hand-wringing happens when we read the credential engine reports that say there's almost, 1 million credentials now in the US. But what are the questions that we need to ask? What are the steps that we have to take to start bringing some more rationalization to this market? How do we start talking in a consistent manner about quality? And how do we help, the working learner actually access that information in useful ways? So I think sometimes I feel, as a field, we swirl around the same questions for a long time. And I would encourage us to really think through, like, what are those, like, forward-looking questions that are really going to help move us forward? So credentials would be one whole bucket. I would say, a second is a lot of great emphasis, including work that JFF is doing around the country around registered apprenticeship. That's, a key strategy, but I think that there is a lot more good work to be dug into around high quality work-based learning opportunities, including, what I would call how you identify and link to competencies and credentials, what someone is working within the learning within the course of their actual job. So at JFF, we did some work with Robert Wood Johnson Foundation around this in healthcare many years ago, followed up with an NSF study that looked at kind of this practice within advanced manufacturing. But I think there's a lot more that can be dug into there around what someone is working within the context, learning within the context of their job, and how you map that back to credit and credentials. And then the third one, I guess I would flag for right now is how can we develop a scalable feedback loop between employers and training providers? I feel like this is something that is done on a very analog basis right now. So how can we create more of a flywheel approach so that training providers, whether that be a community college, a CBO, a four-year institution, know that they are meeting the demands of the employer side? So those are a few. I have many more, but those are my top ones.
Maria, thank you so much for those top three. Byron, do you have top three?
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, there's such a diversity of work that is happening and it needs to happen. So I don't want to go too narrow, but I would say, number one, avoid false dichotomies. So Lewis put in the chat here, and Lewis, as far as I know, was the first person who made working learners a thing. And it was the first time like that. And I think it's a very powerful idea. And he says, college matters, credential matters more, learning matters more, relationships matter most. I think that's a good example of how we should think about it. The idea that one of the very dangerous things in this debate, and it makes you really stupid, these dichotomies. It's like, and I get asked this all the time. Oh, wait, so is college bad and like something else is good? Like, no, you can't be for learning and be against college. That's stupid. But to say that, but college is and learning is good, and college is like a very powerful, has a university, very powerful modalities of learning, but for that to be a bridge to opportunity is great. For it to be a drawbridge that if it pulls up and you're not across it, then you're now outside, right, in some sort of feudal system where you cannot get anywhere, is terrible. And that's a terrible thing for college to become. And I don't think anyone on this call, and I frankly think very few people in colleges want to become that. That's not the role they want to play. But the fact of the matter is, if you create this dichotomy, that is a little bit the role, it is a role that colleges are in fact playing. But so the second thing is related to this, think of it is a complex system. And in a complex system, if you have simple formulations about what's happening, but it's actually a complex system, you're going to make some bad conclusions. So for example, there's a lot of randomized control trials on training programs, because as you know, education works, but training doesn't, right? Even though it's like same species, same activity, just like whatever, some arbitrary age cutoff. But the reason is you're actually analyzing, okay, if you randomize it, are those who got the training intervention 5 years from now, 10 years from now, are they earning more money, right? But of course, earning more money isn't just what the training does. It's, do you get hired? And how can you get hired if employers are literally trying to screen you out? So if you train people with low pedigree and employers are using pedigree as an exclusionary screen, well then, they're not going to, if the program is terrible, they won't have good results. If it's okay, they won't have good results. And if it's great, they won't have good results. So as a result, the actual programs that do have large effect sizes are not coincidentally all programs that don't just have training, but have built an entire bespoke labor market to replace the labor market we have, that have created an employer network, right, to pre-commit to hiring. Now, if there's thousands of training programs and the half dozen that have like good effect sizes are all ones that have replaced the $17 trillion US labor market with their own, maybe it's not about training that doesn't work. Maybe it's the labor market that's not working. So I just give that example because that's example of if you take a simple formulation to a complex system, you're going to have bad results. So if you want to actually understand what's going on, you have to work across the disciplines represented here. And you have to work across data sets, including public data sets, including what you're seeing with companies. And I think that's the heart of why we thought it was so important to create the STARS research community so that you could, yes, you could learn things from job platform data and you can learn things from company data, but you're not taking that as a given. You're also learning from public data. At the end of the day, you're doing what I think is one of the efforts this group is aiming for, which is to actually improve the public data so that you can actually have, like more insight across more research. And so those would be the things I would really highlight. And I think they're relevant in every domain that people here are doing research on.
That's great. That really helps us to frame it. Can you each also talk a little bit about some of the work that you're doing right now with employers? And looking at that, Byron, some of the questions that you're looking at related to that data, and what you're seeing.
Yeah, I'm happy to start. And I think Mitchell included some links earlier to some of this work. So we have a corporate action platform, which is bringing together Fortune 1000 companies around a framework that we call our impact employer framework. So practices that employers can put forward that really have workers at the center. And so this issue of training and development is obviously one of those levers, but we have 6 levers overall that we are promoting. So that is one tangible thing. A subset of that is what we call our Recover Stronger Coalition, and Opportunity at Work has been a partner in this work. So companies that are working together to really see, what can they be putting into practice in this moment of recovery, again, that really promote the well-being and the advancement of their employees. Last month, we issued our Recover Stronger playbook, and I'll make sure there's a link to that in the chat. And then we are doing direct, advisory work with a number of companies to really help them implement new ways of hiring, new ways of sourcing talent, new ways of designing pathways into and through their company, and so forth. So again, it's right now our work is primarily focused on large employers, but looking to expand that to small and medium-sized employers as well.
That's great. Byron, any areas you'd like to add?
Yeah, we do 3 things with employers, and we do it often collaboratively, as Maria pointed out, with JFF and with others. The first thing we do is actually bring the data and insights to them, right, and sort of change their view of what they're doing. I think we've had a fair bit of success with that, and there the STARS category matters a lot because 70 million people, you can't ignore that if you in your talent strategy. Whereas it tends to groups tend to be broken up, little populations, into like little subsegments that end up as corporate social responsibility initiatives, like nice to be nice to the nice type initiatives, and like they don't really put the weight behind it. We think there should be alternative routes, STARS recruiting, like there's campus recruiting, like there's executive recruiting, and just really using the sort of the data to help companies understand that, and they should figure out like which sources do they use. So that's one. The second thing we do is for them to get started hiring STARS. It's they often don't know where to get started, and so it's kind of one-stop source. It's called Stellar Works. It's active right now in DC, LA, and the Bay Area, but it's coming nationwide. And so that can be training providers on the other end, and that's who we've piloted with. Maria mentioned Merit America, or there's Perscola and others like that. But it can also be demonstration platforms like Stack Overflow, or you could pull from GitHub or other things, and just the skills of what they've gotten in the workforce. And I will say a lot of employers, and this is, I think, very interesting for this group, they are very interested in hiring STARS, and they get even more interested if they're STARS who are working towards a bachelor's degree at the same time, because the working towards a bachelor's degree remains a signal of aspiration for them, which a lot of employers like. So again, it's really not as simple as college versus not college. There's a huge value to sort of bringing these together. And then the third and final thing we do with employers, essentially when they hit bottlenecks, we have a kind of a sort of a design studio where we bring together stars, training providers, credential organizations. I saw Roy's comment there about professional associations. I'd love to get sort of them more involved to actually crack the code on how do you break through and expand the aperture of your intake or improve retention. So that's like a design. So those are the three things we do with employers, and it creates a nice kind of cycle of learning, and every piece of that actually creates more interesting questions, some answers and more questions. So we love the synergy between that work and the STARS research community.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much. Papia agreed to help me kind of draw in the chat, which has been amazing. Some very good suggestions, some follow-ups I see on Maria's suggestions about, looking at skills nationally and, national levels. But Papia, want to bring in a theme or a question?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to pull in the question from Susan about how we might start to think about the relationships between the working learner and higher ed and the role of employers in learning in this system as well.
And what is that question there, Papia?
Oh, sure. How might we think about building these relationships between the working learner, between higher ed and employers, right? What does it look like to build stronger bridges?
Build stronger bridges. Okay, Maria or Byron, thought on that?
I think in general, there's just such a need to invest in and design better navigational systems, right? So I think if you had a robust, data-driven navigation system, that could really be the undergirding between the individual, the provider, and the employer. I think, unfortunately, as a nation, we are pretty far from that at the moment. So I would say, continued research around what is effective in terms of career navigational strategies, what has worked, what hasn't, how do we think about equity in the design of those systems, I think is an area that we still need to dig into.
Thanks, Maria. Brian, go ahead.
Look, I think the reality of the world is that there is a tremendous, there's like a huge diversity of job roles and so forth. And as new jobs are created and new roles are found, it's a time when there's so much change in kind of skills requirements, and there's so many more ways to learn effectively. But the system of credentialing and sort of stamping someone as worthy of being considered or investment is lagging tremendously. And I think that, we push employers very hard that to quit complaining about higher education and about, training. If you're not getting what you want, you're to blame, right? You don't tell your component suppliers, oh, send over some fasteners. You tell them heat tolerances,
right.
Pressure tolerances, and so just to say, don't complain that colleges aren't sending you what you want, because what it says here you want is people with degrees, and they're sending you people with degrees. If you want skills, sort of say what you want. And if you're getting some of what you want, but not others, give the feedback. And I understand you can't do it schools by school, but that's, again, what a lot of the one-stop sources. So there's a lot that employers have to answer for, but we can't let higher ed off the hook here, because in this is an area where higher education, the degree of difficulty for people who have finished, half of their education and they've moved for work, they've moved for a spouse, and they cannot get those credits transferred, the complexity of it, the degree of it, the cost of it. I think it's a scandal. And I think within higher education, the degree to which you are able to cross-recognize sort of credits and to work so that people can build on what they have. You've got 35 million Americans who have quite a lot of college credits, but don't have degrees and don't have that currency. if you opened it up and higher education should have the confidence that there is so much to learn and that people are going to be so much a part of the future that you could grow the pie of learning and education more than enough to offset whatever tactical thing that you think you're getting by, making people retake these courses. I think higher education is shooting itself in the foot that way. And I think higher education should do the work to make accessing higher education flexible and in line with the reality, and then expand, use the feedback it can get from employers, because employers aren't actually that great at doing education. So it would be fantastic if educators were actually educating, that employers and technologists were giving more of a target to shoot at, and actual pedagogists were coming up with the ways to learn. That would be the best thing. And I think there's a huge opportunity for education in that, but education has got to look forward and not, backward, not protect its little tiny piece of the pie, but actually work to grow the pie of talent and opportunity and innovation.
That's great. Good charges to us. Thank you so much. Papia, is there another question?
Yeah, I'd love to continue to push on this
Sure.
thread of higher ed and start to, there's a couple of different comments in the chat here about what might it look like for higher ed to meet this moment? How might the institutional structure itself support the working learner a little bit differently in the context of the labor market today?
Go ahead, Marie.
I think there is so much that can be done. And I think that there are certainly pockets of innovation happening as well. But I think maybe before diving into that, I think just one reminder that there are still 21% of adults that are reading at approximately a third grade reading level, right? So I think if we can talk about kind of the very real issues of the difficulties in credit transfer and kind of how do we reimagine the U.S. higher education institution. But I think we also want to remember just how, I would say, underfunded, fragmented, and ineffective our adult basic education system is, and the fact that that system operates very differently in every state. And so I don't want to forget kind of that kind of segment of the population as well. I think it's often overlooked both at the policy and the practice discussions. But I really think that traditional higher ed has a lot of self-reflection to do. And I say that as a parent of a rising high school senior. So we are in the midst of looking at many institutions at this moment. But thinking deeply about connections to the labor market. What does that actually look like within a campus? What does that look like through a student's progression? How do you think about career services? What does career services 2.0 look like? How do you think about as Byron was saying, kind of the returning students and strategies for them? My husband is a adult with many credits but no degree, and after many attempts at many institutions, he is finally close to graduating, but thanks to Southern New Hampshire University, frankly, right, and making it easy for him to transfer his credits. So that's I have seen that kind of happening in our living room, and it is not a simple process. So I think just labor market trends combined with the reality of the pandemic and all of the shifts that we have seen make this a more important question than ever. So I think it's kind of time to get serious, I think, about what does the future look like and how do we put the learner at the center of those conversations.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Byron?
Yeah, I tend to span the worlds of policy and business, and to some extent education. And I would say that, there's been a number of comments about funding, which I completely agree with. It's part of where the effort flows is where the funding flows, right? And I think, and so it's a little bit of a chicken and an egg. But Maria, for example, that example you gave of the number of adults are not kind of workforce literate by our standards. But the kind of what we've learned about those cases that those models that work to intervene there, it tend to be models that actually don't just like sit them again in a classroom, right? But embed it, like, you're learning decimals as you learn to titrate kind of, the administration of medicines, right, on a path to sort of a kind of a nursing assistant kind of role and so forth. And I just think there's so much amazing learning technology that, goes to Stanford, goes to MIT, like all that sort of, learning in, augmented reality and the like. And if you were to actually kind of take seriously, like the sort of the talent of the 21 million people, the people Maria was talking about, or indeed kind of stars, you could actually bring so much innovation there. You could bring so much improvement. But the key is, if that talent is then not valued in the labor market, then the business model, if you will, falls apart, right? And because it tends then not to be valued by policy and so forth. But so the question is, who's going to break through? Is policy going to first kind of create these incentives and then hopefully higher ed follows? I believe that models that are successful on a small scale, whether like university just does it on its own regard or philanthropy works with it, I think those models inspire policy. And I can tell you, as a policymaker, when you have models, you can say, oh, I see how that works, and that's working even on a small scale. It makes it 100 times easier to put policy and funding behind it. So I would urge people here to think about how you can design experiments to take the initiative on this kind of learning, and it can really make a difference. And all the better if you do it together with employers. And I think part of what Opportunity at Work wants to contribute to that is it's very time consuming and actually not perfect experimental design to just do it one employer at a time. So we're trying to create a network of employers that is trying to learn these too, and can partner, with higher education to do it.
Both of you have shared some excellent examples of how you partner with employers and how we might partner with you as we move forward. Unfortunately, we're at the end of our time at 9:45. We had urged that these conversations will continue in smaller groups. We're saving the chat, which, as you both have mentioned, is really rich. We bring our thanks to your inspirational and challenging words to us. We very, very much appreciate it. Mitch, anything more?
Just echoing thanks to all of you for your work this morning, including Papia and Jim. And thanks so much for getting us started so powerfully this afternoon. We're going to try moving to work streams again. I think you have sort of cleaner routes to that this time, but if you're still not sure where to go or how to get to your stream, I'll stay on the line to help you get to where you want to go.
So virtual cheers for Byron and Maria for helping us off.
Everybody.
And everybody to an inspiring week. Thanks so much.